everybody's time. And so, I don't really understand. I have some theories, but I don't truly understand why brokers uh, do things like that, why they would misrepresent numbers. Welcome to the Dirt Podcasts. I'm Miles Solomon. Every week, I share my perspective on commercial real estate and the business of trading dirt. Let's get into it.
Nothing in this podcast is legal, tax, or investment advice. It's for entertainment only, loosely inspired by real estate, and any resemblance to actual people, deals, or outcomes is accidental or aggressively fictionalized. Talk to your attorney, CPA, and advisors before acting on anything you hear.
Oh, man, I fucked up. I was talking so much shit about this deal last week. And we were in escrow, we were fired up, blah, blah, blah. Well, it didn't turn out that way. So when we're underwriting deals, generally we're going off of assumptions. And for multifamily, you have a lot more assumptions than industrial. Industrial is fairly straightforward as far as underwriting goes. I mean, you have to know the numbers, you have to know the market, you have to know the comps and the availables, but generally speaking, it's straightforward. So we deal with a lot of net leased investments or just empty properties that you're underwriting for a leased investment. And our expenses are fairly easy because they're basically all expenses passed through to the tenant. So we'll do just say, for example, we underwrite $1 per square foot per month as your base. So that's your net number of how much you're going to get every month. And then we'll just apply the nets, call it 20 cents in net fees. We'll just apply that. Either it could be separate or it could be something that you absorb where your net rents are 80 cents and your nets are 20 cents to equate to like $1 gross. So depending on if it's gross or net, it can be very straightforward. Our expenses generally these are boxes or it's land. It's not super labor intensive. It's not really complicated to underwrite all the different things. Multifamily is not the case. You have, especially in LA, you've got a lot of different costs and expense to managing properties where, your rental expenses could be 35 or 45% of how much money you're making. So you're not really looking at a net dollar amount. You get your gross income and then you have to back out of that. So for underwriting, it's a little bit more tricky because a lot of the standards that we would use for industrial, they're fixed numbers. We say a new roof costs this amount per square foot, regardless of size, or property maintenance, landscaping is this per square. I mean, there's not that many line items. Whereas in multifamily, depending on the age of the building, age of the roof, age of all these different things, the repairs, how needy your tenants are, what kind of tenants they are. Generally, you'll have like tenants who maybe on both ends of the spectrum, like super high end, expensive apartments might have very needy tenants that have certain requirements on what they expect, and so you have higher OpEx. Or on the opposite spectrum, maybe it's Section 8, lower end building, older building, higher expenses because every time someone leaves, there's a whole turnover. It costs more. So there's more to underwrite. So when I was underwriting the multifamily deal or the multifamily deals that we've been looking at, I would do it two ways. One, I would do it based off the offering memorandum and what basically the advertised expenses and rent roll are. And that's a challenge in itself because most of these multifamily brokers would use kind of made up numbers. So or even more, 80% of the work is just going through different listings and figuring out who looks like they have real underwriting and, whose numbers look real. So you can start from a place of like, okay, I think I know what we're working with here. Just to give you, an example for industrial, any lease investment, they're going to tell you, here's the number for net rent. It's $220,000 a year. You can back out from that your expenses fairly easily. You can do it over, pretty much every type of property. For multifamily, they might say 220,000 in gross income, but then you need to figure out the expenses which are unique to that property. And a lot of times the numbers that they put in their offering memorandums aren't correct. So to get around that, you use like an expense ratio, just like a industry standard for your area, for the type of, the vintage of the product, the type of product. You use an expense ratio of like a certain percentage of your gross income is going to be expenses. So we were using generally 35 to 40%. So when we went into escrow on this property, I had called the broker to confirm that the numbers were correct. And he said they were, and that he'd pulled them from whatever financial document he was looking at. Well, we opened escrow, but we did an inspection. We sent the wire. I think we were in escrow for all of 3 days. My partner calls me and he goes, "Hey, I've been looking at the numbers for the P&Ls that we got, and they don't match our underwriting or the OM at all." He goes, "This is like a fucking 4 cap." And I go, "Oh, that's not possible." I double checked with the guy that his numbers were accurate. Like, he's a fairly well-known broker. That can't be. So we get on a call, we go through the different numbers, and sure enough, like, it's absolute fantasy numbers as far as expenses. The actual operating expenses were like 45%, and the actual income was way different than what we expected, because again, comparing it to like a regular industrial or commercial lease, we would have, like, say for example, a 5-year lease with a tenant, and they pay 220,000 a year. So we know every year we're getting 220,000 plus your percentage increases. In multifamily, you've got vacancy, and I guess you have this in multi-tenant industrial too, but it's a bit different because those are still contract periods of lease. You know how much time you have left, generally, 2 years, 3 years, whatever it is. So you can forecast a year of net or gross revenue fairly accurately, and net revenue. In multifamily, what I've learned is, well, since they're month-to-month tenants or their 1-year leases max, it's very hard to forecast what an actual year of revenue looks like. So when we got the P&Ls and we were looking back through them, we started to see, okay, there's actual vacancies for like many months consistently over the last few years. There's other problems with free rent, for example, to induce a tenant to come into the building. Things like that we weren't expecting, that when you add them together, we went from, I think, a 6.5 cap to, or 6.7 cap to like literally a 4.3. And all of a sudden it's like, wait, what are we doing here? Why are we in escrow on this? Why are we buying this? So the minute that I hung up with him, I canceled the escrow, and that was that. But it was a good lesson, and a reminder that you have to do your underwriting carefully. And you have to, make sure that was a tight due diligence period. I think it was 7 days. So we're sprinting through those 7 days to make sure we don't forget anything. And obviously that's the number one thing we're going to look at. So there was no world where we didn't catch it, but it's still kind of an exercise and a waste of everybody's time. And so, I don't really understand. I have some theories, but I don't truly understand why brokers do things like that, why they would misrepresent numbers. It's not like maybe 1 in 100 deals they would actually sneak through a sale on, but like realistically, any sophisticated buyer is going to do their due diligence, and they're going to see that it's bullshit. And if he had just looked at any of the years of P&L, he would have realized that his expenses were way off, his revenue was off. So it's a waste of time. And so it got me thinking a bit about what style of broker am I, and what style of broker are these people that we're working with, or that we're dealing with, or like, for example, the broker that was just doing this deal. And I used to work. I did a very short period at a corporate company. I worked at Cushman Wakefield for 3 months. It was mostly terrible, but I did have a few good lessons. And one of those reminds me of a story that I had in the first week of working for him. I don't know if I don't think I've told this story. Um, it was my first, probably third day in the business. The guys I was working for had a client who was in the egg business, and they basically buy eggs from farmers. They package them and they distribute them to different grocery stores. I mean, pretty straightforward business. Um, well, he's a very ornery old man, and uh, his building was getting eminent domain to build the Sixth Street Bridge, I think it was. So he had to find a new building. And this is a guy, sometimes you'll meet these people who have been in their business a long time. You walk right into their office, you know that they're never going to sell, that they're going to go out of that office in a coffin. And he was that kind of guy. So he was, from the second I met him, I could just tell that he was a very grumpy guy that was not happy about having to buy a new building. And so we were we show up at the building that we're touring, which was like a much more modern, kind of state of the art industrial building with coolers and refrigerators and freezers and the whole thing. And they had a production line, et cetera. And so the guys I'm working for represent the buyer. And there's I think it was Newmark. Newmark was representing the seller, and they'd sent their junior guy there. A guy who'd probably been in the business for a few years. Nice kid. He gave us the brochures, and we start to walk through the building. And we probably walk through, I mean, it's like I don't know, 40 or 50,000, 40, I think it's around a 40,000 foot building. We walk through the building. It takes us about 10 or 15 minutes because you got to put on a suit. It's like a sterile environment. You got to wash your hands, put on a hairnet. So we do the thing, and we're walking through the building, and the listing broker from Newmark is telling us all about the building, the kind of production they're doing, every kind of detail. You could tell he had done this before on this specific building. He had a lot of information, and he was knowledgeable. So we walked through the building. At the end of the tour, he asked the group, he goes, "So does anybody have any questions?" And our client, the buyer, he says, "Yeah, I've got a question." And the listing broker goes, "Okay, go ahead." And he says, "Yeah, do you ever shut the fuck up?" And I was just standing there like, oh, Jesus, Lord. I mean, I had a feeling he was not going to be happy with the amount of talking and all that, the salesmanship of the tour, but I was not expecting anything like that. So we were all kind of just standing there. Cool faces, but like, had we not been absolutely sideswiped, we would have been just jaws to the ground, like flabbergasted. And the listing broker kind of stutters for a second, and he goes, "Okay, well, thank you very much." And he walks away. And so our group, the guys that I was working for and their buyer, walk ahead, and the listing broker, turns to me. He goes, "Dude, what the fuck is wrong with your guy's client? What an asshole." And I was like, "Yeah, man, I don't really know. This is my second day on the job. I'm not sure what's normal in this business." And I had a lot of other experiences like that, but that one I remember for a couple of reasons. First, because it was fucking funny, and it was. But second, left a really lasting impression that that to be a great broker it's not enough to just be extremely knowledgeable, charismatic, all those other qualities. I think more than maybe even that, or I don't know how to rank it, but I would say it's extremely important that you know how to read a room. And I think as a tendency, I would advise, and I've always practiced, that less is more. And so I think this applies to a lot of things. For one, every time I tour a building, I ask, assuming, for example, that I'm representing the owners, and there's a buyer's broker, I'll ask him or her up front before their client gets there, hey, do you want me to take the lead, or do you want to present the building? I can give you the facts. How do you want to do this? So first thing, I kind of defer to the relationship of whoever we're touring through. Second is I'll kind of get a vibe of who these people are, and I'll start with much less. And I'll usually just ask the group if the listing broker or the buyer's broker, or vice versa, if I'm the one representing the buyer, if they haven't indicated to me one way or the other, I'll ask the group. I say, hey, do you guys want to do, like Indiana Jones loud tour where I give you all the details, or do you guys just want the pertinent facts and you can ask me questions, or how do you want to do this? And I just try to get a very clear sense up front of what they want. A lot of these business owners are ornery. They're busy. They have their own relationship with their broker that, they built over a long time. And so you have to be like somewhat mindful and aware of that. You have to be really mindful and aware of that. So I always try to get like a sense of who I'm dealing with and what do they want. Cause I don't ever want to be that guy where at the end of the tour, they go, do you ever shut the fuck up? Like, you got to read the room. And then beyond touring, I think that same attitude is what you have to have when it comes to listing properties, putting information on brochures, answering calls, questions. There's a tendency, I think, from brokers that they want to, I don't know if it's that they want to know everything or they want to act like they know everything, or if it's just brokerage attracts a certain type of character and personality that's super confident, and you get a lot of salesman guys. Whatever the reason is, there is a lot of nuance to this business, and it's all backed up by legal peril. I would say there's a lot of legal risk at every step of brokerage. So I want to be really careful about what I'm representing, which is a weird idea. I want to be careful about what I'm representing. Most people, maybe I'm not that thoughtful of a person, but I generally just kind of disclaim when I talk about things. I could be wrong. I'll say that a lot, or I'm probably wrong, or whatever it is. But it's one thing to kind of disclaim that, but it's another to really think about like what warranties and representation really mean in the brokerage business, because it's not a familiar way of talking. People don't really talk like everything they're saying is a representation or a warranty. But in fact, when you are doing brokerage, it can be taken as such. And, people go to court and are hung out to dry because they made claims or answered questions in ways that appeared to be a representation that other people relied on. So what I mean specifically by that, like, for example, let's say you're touring through a building and a client asks you, hey, are the sprinklers, do the sprinklers have a recent certification of completion? Well, in your mind, oh yeah, I saw that they had tags on there. So most likely, those are recent, but they could be old tags. So a lot of people, especially newer brokers, the older guys have all been weeded out by this and don't usually do it. But it still happens a lot, like surprisingly a lot. They'll answer, yeah, it's been certified, or yeah, the certs are new, or, they'll use some kind of reasoning where they go, well, the clients in here, and they'll do this in their head, they won't necessarily say it, but the clients in here have a certificate of occupancy. They wouldn't be able to have that if they didn't have recent sprinklers. So yes, there's a cert. And I think that tendency gets people in a lot of trouble, whether it's legal or just ethically, morally. I think answering things that you don't really know is a mistake. And it's okay, especially if you're new in the business, it's really fine and okay to say, I don't know the answer to that, but I'm going to check and I will get back to you, and then follow up with the answer. I think that's perfectly reasonable way to be. And you don't need to know everything. I mean, I've been doing this for a little while, not as much as some, but I still regularly say, I don't know, but I'll have to check on that. And sometimes people will press you and they'll say, well, if you had to guess or things like that. And I'm not unreasonable. I'll say, well, if I had to guess on this one thing, I'd say this or whatever. But I try to preface it and I'm really clear that I really don't know the answer. So brokers think that because buyers and sellers sign these agreements that say, there's no representations, the property's being sold as is, whereas blah, blah, blah. They think that protects them, but the reality is it doesn't. Legally, I think it's questionable, and I think you could still get in a hot water. But ethically, morally, if you answer a question that you don't know the answer to, even if it's minute, you answer it, and that person, maybe it's a critical part of their business. It's happened before. I've seen it where, what's a good, I have to think of like a good example of, but like where someone, for example, asks like, hey, do you know how wide the yard is? And the answer could have been one of two things. It could have been, yeah, it's 140 feet or 130 feet. Or maybe they did, they say, oh, I lasered it and it's 130 or whatever. And maybe the client has 30 trucks a day and they need to be able to turn around their trucks to face the docks. And they could only do that at 145 feet or, something along those lines. Well, it turns out that little detail was a huge part of their business model. And, they should have done their due diligence, but you told them and you're a confident guy and you seem like you know what you're talking about. And they relied on that. And then they, reputationally, I think more than just legally, if you get the reputation for being just a sleazy salesman that kind of says whatever, or just arrogant that you can't admit when you don't know something or when you don't have the information, that gets around. And all these clients speak to each other. They all know each other, especially the ones in the same business or landlords who live next to each other. So they talk to each other and, stories get out that you did this or you said this, and then it fucked up this whole deal and it was a whole thing. And even if you weren't legally on the hook, there's ramifications, I think, to your credentials or your reputation that like you can't afford because this business is built on your reputation. So when I think about what kind of broker I want to be, I want to be a broker who admits when I'm wrong, that has no problem saying that I don't know the answer, but I will get back to you, and then actually doing the work and following up. I want to be the broker that when I make mistakes, I correct them quickly, whether that's, buying a multifamily deal and not doing the correct underwriting or whatever it is. I think it's important that the world has enough used car salesmen. It's important that you're not another salesman, because where we're going with the business and where everything's headed with AI and information at your fingertips, there's no shortage of information and there's no shortage of knowledge. A lot of it's wrong. A lot of it's bad. Your job is to decipher, and when you make, let's call it a representation, that it's a correct one, or that you preface it by saying, I'm not entirely sure, but this is what I think. And I'm not encouraging everyone that you have to speak like an attorney all the time, because there's brokers who are like that too, who are just, you ask them a question, they just go, well, you'd have to just refer to the records or the permits or stuff. They're just completely unhelpful. I think there's a healthy balance between both, where you're not a lawyer, but you're also not a used car salesman, somewhere in between, where you have the humility to admit when you're wrong. So I was wrong about the multifamily thing. I've been wrong about a lot of other things. And I'll be wrong about more things, but I have no problem admitting that. And when I have make a mistake, correcting that mistake and doing it as quickly as possible. So reps and warranties are an interesting thing, and it's interesting how they relate back to the brokerage business itself. I think warranties is probably it will be its own podcast episode, but just lightly, I do think that the topic of warranties is really interesting in commercial real estate, because I've been in deals where we're negotiating for weeks. I swear to God, I've been in a deal where we're actually negotiating for like 2 months. It was with a great client of mine. He's in the textile business. Um, we were buying a building in Commerce, and there was a they had been in escrow twice before. There was an attorney on the other side who was an absolute pain in the ass, and we got into a negotiation to buy this building. And the long story short is, uh, the seller fired his attorney in the middle of the deal, shredded up the contract, and started over with a new attorney and a new contract. Then the buyer fired his attorney after that and shredded up the contract again. And then we did a third new contract, which is what we ultimately closed the deal with. And a big part of it was about representations and warranties, specifically about warranties. Um, there are warranties that you rely on in a deal. And so when people say no reps, no warranties, I'm having a trouble imagining or thinking of a deal I've done where there were truly no warranties. Um, I've done deals where a warranty is prefaced by knowledge. So they call it a knowledge-based warranty. I've done plenty of deals like that, but no warranties. I don't know that I've done a deal with that. And so basically what warranties are, it's a legal term for a clause in the contract that says that basically you warranty X thing. So it could be, for example, a common warranty would be, that I, the seller, am legally authorized to sell this property. Or I, the seller, a knowledge-based one, for example, am not aware of any open lawsuits against the property. There are things that you rely on in good faith business is how you can think of warranties. A lot of times I think the distinction between representations and warranties are representations are like promises or guarantees about the outside world or about conditions or things where people get caught up. And that's why there's really, an emphasis to have no representations. I didn't say it was, I'm not representing that you could use this building for your use. It's possible that you couldn't. But I warranty, for example, that I used it for my use, which could be the same use as yours, but I'm warranting that I did that or that the statement I'm making is true. Another warranty could be that the documents that I've provided are true to the best of my knowledge. A deal with no warranties, I don't know that you could actually do that deal, because you'd end up in these weird scenarios where, and I've seen it, where they cross out all the representations and warranties. And I've been on the side where the attorney calls me, where I'm on the opposite side of where they've crossed out the terms, the warranties. And he said, well, your client crossed out the warranty that that they have the legal authority to sell this property under their LLC. Why would they do that? So I think there's, to some extent, negotiation is not, sometimes the lawyers hijack the deal, but sometimes, a lot of times, it's about what is the intent. And there's been deals where you just get a bad feeling. Why doesn't this person want to represent this thing or warranty this thing or what? Very simple, basic things that are fundamental to good faith negotiations in a transaction, things that you rely on. It's, for example, you're selling a leased investment and you provide the financials of the rent that you've received. You're not representing that the buyer will always get that rent. But what you're warranting that you received this rent. If you weren't willing to give a warranty that the information that you've provided is correct, at least to the best of your knowledge, then those numbers could say anything, right? It could be completely made up. So not to digress too much, but going back to the original topic of like, what kind of broker do you want to be? What kind of style? Do you want to be someone that makes representations that aren't true? Or do you want to be, someone that's relied upon and may not always give the answer that people want, but, to the best of their ability, you give your knowledge warranty, and you make sure that you express it that way. So it's just a topic that I've been thinking of, and I think it's worth talking more with a legalese person about the idea. But just philosophically, I think that's an interesting conversation. And thank you for joining me today.